6:30 p.m. local time, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and thank you very much for joining us on another edition of Viewpoint on TBS television. As a guest tonight, we will be receiving Dr. Gideon Dbs View. He is a PhD holder and a Master's in Science in Computer Science from Blekinge Institute of Technology, Sweden, and currently he is a senior university lecturer at the Department of Information Technology, Borås University, still in Sweden. Like yesterday, I told you that we are going to be having some major innovations, and of course today we are bringing you some of those innovations, that is by having guests who are out of Cameroon, be it in other countries in Africa and in other European or Asian countries. And in tonight's edition, we are going to be talking about hosting online courses as a way or a remedy to limit the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. So in collaboration with our producer or the whole technical crew, we are going to be receiving Dr. Gideon Dbs View, and we will be accompanied in the studio by Mange Venashus. Good evening to you, Doctor, and thank you very much for honoring our invitation.
Good evening, Vanessa, and thank you for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to use your platform to share my views about the effect of COVID on our society, particularly when it comes to online learning. And I would like to start by taking this opportunity to reflect on the several lives that we've lost due to the pandemic, the several lives that have been cut short. I would also like to take this opportunity to reflect on the people that we have lost in the English part of Cameroon, who are facing a double sword here with respect to COVID and also to the conflict that is going on now. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the program.
So you stay with us while we welcome Mange Venashus. Good evening to you, Mange Venashus, and welcome.
Thank you, Vanessa. Good evening. Good evening to our viewers. And good evening to Dr. Gideon. It has been a while since we met, and it's my pleasure to discuss with him. Let us also share views on ways we can, like Vanessa, like you said, ways we can see how to mitigate the ravaging spread of COVID-19 pandemic.
Let us have the first part of the show. In the first question, can online courses solve the problem of education posed by COVID-19 in Cameroon? Dr. Gideon, over to you. Yes or no?
I wish the answer was that simple, but yes, online courses can improve the situation. Maybe not completely alleviate the situation.
Mange Venashus, yes or no?
In Cameroon, I say no.
No. In the second question, are there better options that could be used, especially during this pandemic period? Doctor?
Consider the one-to-many relationship that exists between teachers and students, or maybe in some cases many-to-many. Then there is no parallel system that I can think of. And so the answer is no, no parallel system to the internet.
To the internet, Mange Venashus?
Yes, I share the same opinion that there is no other option than using the internet.
Let us have the debate. Once more, you are all welcome. Doctor, in the first question, can online courses solve the problem of education posed by COVID-19? Case study, Cameroon. You think that online courses are far way better as a way to limit the spread of the pandemic? So what are some of those points that you could outline to support your point of view?
Like I said, Vanessa, this might not be just a one-sided coin. Online courses brings with them several opportunities, but they also bring with them a number of challenges. And the easiest way I would like to look at this would be from three key perspectives. It will be looking at the effect on the learner, the effect on the teaching, and also the effect on the infrastructure that need to be in place for teaching and learning to take place. And several points might fall positive if you're looking at the learner or if you're looking at the teaching. There are a number of issues that need to be looked into carefully before one could come up with a conclusion, the kind of conclusion that you're talking about. For example, when it comes to flexibility, while online teaching and learning might give some flexibility to teachers, it could be questionable whether this flexibility is a positive strength for students who all of a sudden could participate in lectures from any point or from any geographic location without having the constraint of coming to a classroom. One could also think of it in terms of incentives. One of the challenges for students in learning is to be able to gather the incentive that they need in order to participate in the learning process. This incentive becomes a challenge when students have to sit home. There are some indications that students have a better retention once they are engaged, once they have the incentive and participate in online learning. There are several other issues. We could talk about security. Security becomes an issue because of the capabilities of the platforms that are being used. There is the element of group work, whether students participate better in group work when they are sitting individually or when they have a physical meeting. Communication is a challenge because communication is not just talking. There's body language and all the other aspects that come with it. Also, lack of confidence. When students cannot see other students, listen to other students, act as a group, they tend to double guess their own positions. They tend to lack confidence in what they are doing because of interaction. When it comes to looking at it from the teaching perspective, of course, there are positive elements. The scalability, the fact that you can teach more students than the classroom can permit. But on the other hand, you have limited pedagogical options. Another key challenge is how do you assess and certify that a student does something when you cannot physically control the environment in which the student is using. You have flexibility. You can be able to give lectures from anywhere as well. There's less time. You don't have to travel to work and so on and so forth. So there are several aspects that might need to be taken into consideration in order to actually gauge the effects of online studies. And this is going to take several years after the corona pandemic hopefully is over before we can actually ascertain how this has changed the educational landscape. And when it comes to the physical infrastructure, of course, we know that there are positive part of it. Well, we don't make use of the classroom. We are not limited by the classroom. Maybe we save some electricity or maybe water bills and so on, but also it could lead to some difficulties in terms of the economic models.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gideon. But I would still like to know from you, as an information and technology university lecturer, looking at the case study of Cameroon, is it possible for us to adopt this system of teaching, that is teaching online? Because some few years back, that is 1 year back, when the Ministry of Secondary Education adopted that format of teaching, a lot of students and parents even were complaining that they do not have access to their courses.
If the question is the maturity of the technology, then the answer is yes. The technology has come a long way. The challenges that Cameroon face as a country would be with respect to the infrastructure. This is no news to anybody. For you to deliver online education, the infrastructure has to be there. Without the necessary infrastructure, this becomes a very difficult thing to do in Cameroon, of course. So I think the right way to go would be to assess the availability of internet coverage to begin with, and if every single child that goes to school has access to the internet. If there isn't, then the government might decide to start by making sure that internet is available or they can discuss online education. Otherwise, it's just not possible.
Otherwise, it's just not possible. Thank you very much, Dr. Gideon. You stay with us while we get the point of view of Mange Venashus. We rather think that online courses cannot solve the problem of education posed by the coronavirus pandemic. Mange Venashus, Dr. Gideon talked of some of the advantages: flexibility, incentive, security, and maybe lack of confidence on the part of the students. So, what makes you think that this will not solve the problem to the pandemic?
Yes, we are talking about the situation with the case study being what we have in Cameroon. And if you put what we have in Cameroon, we are trying to find out, is it possible that we overcome the barrier, the challenges of curbing the spread of COVID-19 pandemic and then going on with lectures or with classes? You would understand that if we take the situation in Cameroon, it is not possible, because when you listen to what Doctor said, he indicated some setbacks that Cameroon has in terms of infrastructure, in terms of internet connection. Cameroon is not limited to Douala or Yaoundé, Bafoussam, Bamenda. Even when we talk of Bamenda, Bafoussam, there are some areas in these regions that internet is still a far-fetched concept for them. It won't. If we have to go by that, it means those areas automatically are knocked off from the concept of education, because they will not be able to cope up with internet. So when we talk of internet coverage in Cameroon, it is a problem. Even here in Douala, Yaoundé, where there is internet connection, when you look at the strength of internet connection, how many students would have the availability of that internet connection to stay online for a class of maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes. That is the average duration for those in the secondary section. How many of them would be able to afford? Because just having the simple megabyte, you discover that it is quite expensive for such kinds of ventures. Because if we have them just for text, it may go. But when it comes to video, where you have to listen to the teacher delivers lecture, it will become a problem. That is video calls. It will become a problem. Another issue is the problem of electricity. We know when we talk of internet, we talk of making use of electricity. You cannot do without. How many of our localities have reliable electricity connection? When I talk of reliable, is how many of us can boast of electricity maybe 2-3 days with continuous supply? In such cases, it means once there is an interruption in electricity supply, there will be interruption in classes. And with such interruptions, it would not be possible to talk about the educational calendar, calendar, curriculum, coverage of the program. So when you put all this together, Doctor said something about infrastructure as well. How many of our students or our parents will make use of up-to-date infrastructure, like call it cell phones, that will permit their children to communicate with the teacher who is giving out lectures, maybe from class or from school or from home. Because they tell us that out there in Western countries, Doctor would affirm that most of them lecture from home, and the infrastructure permits them to do that, so it's possible for that to take place. But in our context, we would not be able to do it. Another issue is the problem of control. Even when you are in class, the children that you have in front of you, at one point it becomes unbearable for you to instill some kind of discipline to make sure that you teach. What happens in this case, where you are talking, like I'm talking to a camera, I don't know how many people are behind that camera who are following what I'm saying, which means the teacher is talking, whether that student is able to listen, we don't know. When it comes to infrastructure, the question of exchange, teaching and learning, the teacher is not able to interact with his learners because the connection is not that call it good. Yes. So if children cannot communicate with you, imagine a student who has a question and he has to ask a question. You see, it becomes difficult. You will not be able to know whether the child is following what you are saying, whether the child has a difficulty, whether you have addressed that difficulty. Interaction will be, will not be fluent, and in such case, it will not be possible in Cameroon. I know, like Doctor said, if we are talking about the concept of using the internet, it is practical. But then the infrastructure, Vanessa, I don't think that it is possible in our context when it comes to Cameroon.
Thank you very much, Mange Venasius. Back to you, Dr. Gideon, as far as regarding what Venasius just said. Now, let us look at the possibility back there in Sweden, or you as a lecturer. Is there that facilitation in interaction between you and the students? How is it being done?
I think there are two parts of it. The first part of it is what we all agree on, and is the infrastructure. Then the second part of it is really the content once the infrastructure is there. When I was outlining the challenges, I was more already on the content, but then when it comes to Cameroon, we have the issue, the infrastructure. So here, for example, I have been teaching from home for over a year now, and it has not been the same way as in teaching in the classroom. There have been several challenges, just one of them being what Venasius just mentioned, and I call it incentive. The idea that you cannot control what the students are doing behind the scenes. You're not sure if they are following you, and this boils down ultimately to how incentivized the students are. So yes, it is a challenge in that case, and that's not a challenge that you can expect to easily be solved with the online education. Of course, that challenge as well exists in the classroom, but maybe in a different format. But yes, if you want to put the parallel with respect to how some of those challenges are overcome here as compared to Cameroon, then I would say for the first, there's accessibility of the internet. That is not an issue. For the second, we are dealing with still the problems of how to handle this freedom, both from the student side, also from the teaching side. How you ensure that the student took a test online and there was no other person communicating with the students. How do you ensure that students work in groups and that they have interacted sufficiently in order to accomplish what they're presenting and so on? So those challenges they exist, and to some extent I agree with Venasius on that.
Okay. All right, let us take the second question of this debate program. Are there better options that could be used, especially during this pandemic? After highlighting some of the advantages and, of course, the challenges, now we are trying to find out if there are better options to adopt rather than only going for online courses. Doctor, back to you.
Well, as far as I mentioned, as I'm concerned, I don't see how you can scale up the educational system as it is without having a system that can support a distributed learning in the way that the internet does. But having said that, there are two things I think we should separate. When we talk about online learning, it could also be in real time. That means that I'm talking and the students are listening and they can ask questions in real time. But we could also try to separate that, especially for a country like Cameroon, the non-real-time element of it, which means that in this case, I could play a video that the students can listen to, and then somehow I can try to make sure that that video get downloaded on a student computer, and therefore we do not need to necessarily synchronize the lecture in real time. And that way we might be able to overcome some of the issues that might have to do with electricity or so on. When what we really need is to disseminate the information, but also to receive feedback from the students. And I would say if this is in the case of Cameroon, these processes might take relatively longer time compared to what real-time online learning would be. Of course, there are also disadvantages of doing that in terms of interactions and so on.
Of those disadvantages?
Well, I mean, the disadvantage would be the lack of interaction. You cannot get feedback in real time. Some questions and issues that students might have to wait until they can communicate you again. And you might not also be able to interact with the students in real time. So the challenge is in both parts. It's in both the student. It will be in some form or shape a way of, say, reading. The students is listening after the lecture has been delivered, compared to the scenario where you have real time at the same time when you record the lecture, giving the students the opportunity to discuss questions in real time, but also to come back later on and listen to the lecture.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mange Venashus. Equally think that there are no better options that could be used, especially during this period. Doctor just talked of real-time learning and the non-real-time learning, which, if it is to be applied in a Cameroonian context, it is still difficult or challenging.
Yes, Vanessa, we are talking about ways to curb the spread of coronavirus. One of the means was to ask learners to stay at home. You know, what they were telling us as a lockdown. We are supposed to stay at home. And if we are supposed to stay at home, it doesn't mean that children should not learn. We still let classes go on. But like we said, if you have to talk about ways of making sure that we keep the teaching learning process ongoing, even in lockdown, there are no better ways than the internet, than the use of the internet. But then, with the use of the internet, given the shortcomings, like I said, that we have, especially in the case in Cameroon, there are still possibilities that we can bypass, you see, the difficulties that we have, the question of real-time learning. We talked of the strength of the internet connections that we have, perhaps in Cameroon as a country, or Africa in general. And if we have to continue with learning, there are possibilities of, let us have lectures delivered in soft copies. Let us put away the question of videos, because we know if you have to do what we call video, online lectures, real-time lectures, like Doctor was saying, it needs, strong and reliable internet connection. If teachers could have their material brought down in soft copies and circulate them like text to their learners, I think like each learner has maybe a Facebook address or an address, electronic address through which you can post the content of the lecture, and then the child studies, and if there are worries, the child would send the worries, maybe the question, and the teacher works on them. I know it will be time consuming. I know because the teacher has to address maybe 50 students that are supposed to be in this course, and there are 50 questions, you have to answer them 50 times. Whereas if it was, a real-time lecture, once you are answering question from student A, you may be solving a situation that student B, C might have had, and that will save time. But because of the constraint of, lack of infrastructure that we have, I think if we go that way, it will be able to reduce the impact of just letting it go. Then there is this issue of, Vanessa will talk of unreliable internet connection. It is not as if Cameroon or Africa is cursed that we cannot have a reliable internet connection. It is possible. If we can do it in Douala and Yaoundé, if we can do it between Douala and maybe Sweden like we are doing, then there is a possibility that we can do it between Jakiri and call it Kumbu. We can do it between Douala and Jakiri. We can do it between Jakiri, perhaps a school in Jakiri, and a student who is somewhere maybe in a village, call it Mbokam, a village, call it Tan, where, it may be,
difficult.
Yes, I mean, where we are typically in a local setting. So it is a question of lack of, I call it political will here. Because if the powers that be want to update our internet infrastructure, they can do it, Vanessa. I think it is a lack of the political will to update those. We cannot say that Africa has been condemned not to have internet connections that maybe Western countries can have.
Anyway, thank you very much, Mange Venashus. Maybe in our subsequent edition, we are going to be looking at the strength of the internet in Africa. But back to Doctor. Doctor, I would like to know from you, to what extent do you appreciate the management of COVID-19 in Cameroon?
That's a difficult question. The question may be, to what extent have the world succeeded in handling the COVID? And everybody's wish is that we had left this in 2020, but we are in 2021, and we still wish that 2021 shouldn't round up while we're still talking COVID. But when it comes to Cameroon, I think it's several elements that we can think about, especially when it comes to education, as we're talking about. One of the good side of it is that teenagers somehow are sort of, they are not affected in the same way that the elderly people are being affected, which in some way makes it easier for them relative to the elderly population. And that means that their education maybe should not have been interrupted in the same way that it has. Well, we've learned along as things have gone. But when it comes to Cameroon, I think my worry is that maybe people might need to take it a bit more serious. There is still a lot of disinformation out there. I'm involved in one initiative where we are working on tools of how to manage disinformation in relation to COVID, and particularly for the African continent. And also, I think this is a major problem in Cameroon when it comes to disinformation. And a lot of people seem to buy into disinformation when it comes to COVID. So this is there are no conspiracy theories around this. This is a fact. It's killing people, and people need to stay safe, and the government need to do its job in terms of informing people, but also in terms of acquiring the solutions that individuals cannot be able to afford, such as vaccines, such as putting in place conduct of practices that will minimize the spread, as in the case of education, like you've mentioned, but also being transparent about it and publishing statistics that would inform people on what decisions they should make in order to minimize this.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your intervention and, of course, your point of view. It has been a pleasure having you back there in Sweden. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, and thank you, Venatius, and I hope you have a nice Tuesday.
Thank you very much also for the wishes, Manga Venatius. It has been a pleasure having you.
Actually, Vanessa, you know, when you have an old-time friend like that, you know, it gives you you feel connected at least.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. This was a surprise package we had for you. And of course, I will not go without applauding the technical capabilities of our technicians being directed by McDonald Tombo. That said, stay tuned. We'll have more opportunities to have international guests and get their point of view as far as issues of concern are in Cameroon, Africa, and the world as a whole. Do stay tuned. Coming up next, we'll be having the Primetime Newscast. Goodbye.